Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, this is lecture number 5 of 7. We have 2 more. I want to make sure that you see our next 2 speakers, November 13th and November 20th. Remember that to successfully pass the course, you have to attend 6 of 7 lectures. Don't look for excused absences. They're not necessary to provide me with them. As long as you attend 6, you earn the credit for the class. Make sure that we have all our electronic devices, cell phones, PDAs, computers, whatever. We want everything turned off so that you can focus your attention on our speaker. Thank you. Okay, today we have Kathleen DiGiorno from Medtronic. She currently serves as the company's Vice President, Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer. She reports to the President. She's been in this role since 2006. She joined Medtronic in 1998, and I have to read this, the cardiac rhythm disease management business in the areas of clinical research. She is responsible for drafting, negotiating clinical trial agreements, informed consents, institutional review board issues, patient privacy issues, anti-kickback issues, Medicare fraud, clinical research, publication, and policy issues related to medical devices. Prior to Medtronic, Kathy was a shareholder at Briggs & Morgan, PA in St. Paul, Minnesota, where she represented corporate clients in complex commercial litigation. She also clerked for the Honorable Frank McGill, United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit. She is very close to you guys. She actually graduated from Notre Dame in '85. She also graduated, cum laude, I might add, also from the University of Minnesota Law School, where she served as the note and comment editor for Minnesota Law. Kathy is joining us basically based on an invitation that came from our development office. We've been tracking Kathy to kind of find out what's been going on with her life. She's been a very influential person in the medical industry, and we're looking forward to her talk. I encourage you to write down questions. She will entertain questions either during her talk or at the end of her talk, whichever is more appropriate. When you do have a question, though, we would like you to use the microphones. That way we'll be able to record it so that when we have the video online, everybody will hear your question as well as hear the answer. Okay. With that, I'll introduce Kathy. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sam. I'm really excited to be back. I was telling Sam just before we started that I graduated from Notre Dame in 1985. My husband graduated in 1986. He's an architect, and we come back periodically, but it's usually when we're on our way driving to the East Coast and we stop and spend some time on campus and go to the bookstore and those kinds of things. So it's fun for me actually to be back to talk to students. We're going to go to the game tomorrow. I'm really excited about that. I also shared when I was chatting with people before my presentation today that I don't think I ever had a class where all you had to do was go. So good for you guys. I'm glad I'm not the 7th speaker, though, because 6 of 7, if you come to all the lectures, then you might not be here. All right. As Sam said, I graduated in 1985. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. We drove out, so I landed over at the Hilton Garden Inn at about 1 a.m., finished my presentation, sent it off, and here I am. I'm the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Medtronic, which is a medical device company that is headquartered in Minneapolis. I want to get a little bit of a sense of the room. So can you just, by a show of hands, tell me who's an undergrad? Okay, who's an undergrad in the business school? Wow, kind of like warm-up exercises. Any grad students? Just a handful. Okay, great. So after considering and rejecting a number of different approaches for this presentation, ranging from a theoretical look at the development of the corporate compliance theory, because that's what I do in my day job, to some sort of deep dive into the medical device industry's perspective on healthcare reform, I stepped back and took a look at the invitation that I had received when I was invited to speak, and I focused on the following language in the course syllabus. Topics will vary from speaker to speaker, ranging across a spectrum of business to expose students to the opportunities and challenges in today's environment. Speakers will identify ideas they feel are relevant and valuable to students' development as they prepare for a professional career. And I took that as an invitation to just mostly share my story about who I am, how I got here, what I do, and to the extent I have advice, and I'm a mom of 4 kids, so I have a lot of advice. I'll share some of that with you guys too. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my company, Medtronic. Then I'm going to move into kind of my story, how I ended up there, a little bit about what I do in my day job, some detail about my interactions with our board of directors at Medtronic, since the title of this course is Board Insights. Then I'll share some thoughts on why industries connected to healthcare will be a good place to land going forward. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. I'd encourage you to ask anything you want. I'm pretty open and happy to talk about whatever. So, I always have to start with the disclaimer that what you're going to hear today is Kathy DiGiorno's personal views. These are not the views of Medtronic Incorporated. And I always start any presentation like this with this slide, which is a picture of my family. I wanted to introduce you to them. They're not here, but they may wander in at some point. When I left at 10, they were all still sleeping. So. This is my family. My husband, Vinny, up on the top, would be your right. Graduated from Notre Dame in 1986. He's an architect, works for a mid-sized firm in the Twin Cities, has been part-time, working largely from home since our oldest daughter, Margaret, who's there in the middle, was born 15 years ago. So we're going to talk a little bit at the end about technology as an enabler for flexibility in many areas of your life. Margaret is 15. She's a sophomore in high school. Maybe she'll come here. I don't know. She said she'd like to, and I think she could, and she would love it, but it's hard to set expectations with kids when it's so hard to get in. So. My son, John, in the front there, just turned 13 a few weeks ago. He's the only boy, and after his littlest sister was born, for about 2 years, he lobbied to have twin boys so it would be equal, and we would have to buy a Suburban. That's the John story. He's a hockey player. Olivia, who's in the gray sweatshirt there, is 10. I don't know how many of you come from relatively big families. I'm an only child, but Olivia is the officious one, and I don't know if that's a third child thing or what, but if she comes in, you'll see her organizing everybody else. That's kind of her role in life. And Isabella, in the green there, is 7. She's in 2nd grade. She just learned to read, and her goal in life is to be a hockey goalie. So she played baseball this summer because she thought it would improve her goalie skills. So that's my family. They're important to me. We don't have any. Oh, this picture was taken in Ireland, kind of on the Dingle Peninsula. 2 years ago, we took a family trip there. There were 10 of us. It was a great time. Didn't feel much like a vacation at the end, but it was a good experience. We don't have any pets, cats and dogs kind of pets, but we do, as of about 6 months ago, have chickens. So in the city of St. Paul, you can have chickens in your backyard. And my oldest daughter, Margaret, decided that she would like to do this as a project to convince her dad to have pets. So we bought 5 baby chicks. One turned out to be a rooster. We had to take it back to the feed store. We're not sure what happened to him. And about a month ago, the chickens started to lay eggs, so now we are awash in eggs. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit about Medtronic. And I promise this won't be death by PowerPoint, but I felt like giving you guys something to look at other than me was probably useful. So Medtronic is a medical technology company. It is 60 years old. An interesting story about its creation. Its founder is a guy named Earl Bakken. That's him on your right there, who grew up in kind of modest circumstances in Minneapolis. And when he was 20, started a little company with his brother-in-law to repair electronic equipment. And he was inspired by the movie Frankenstein. And that's why he was interested in electrical equipment and in electricity and everything about it. Earl turned 80 last summer, and he lives in Hawaii now. Still an emeritus member of the Medtronic board, but really lives in Hawaii. He came back and sponsored a showing of the Frankenstein movie. That was his birthday party. Anyways, he became very close with a number of people at the University of Minnesota Hospital, including Dr. Walton Lillehei, who I think is pictured there on the right. And he was a famous cardiac surgeon. And most of the time his surgeries were successful, but sometimes he found himself needing external stimulation for people's hearts. And one day, after the university hospitals lost power and they lost a little boy who had been on an electrical external pacemaker, he had the idea basically to come up with an implantable pacemaker and worked with Earl on that. And that is kind of the story of how Medtronic turned from a company that repaired radios, literally, and other medical equipment to a technology company. And also is a great innovation story, I think. Medtronic is still a close collaborator with the physician community on technology development and on innovation. And I'm sure I'm going to get some questions about some of our physician relationships, which have been in the news recently. So I'll probably come back to that physician collaboration theme and why it's important to us. So 1960 was an important year at Medtronic. It was the year that Medtronic got the rights to make and sell the first implantable pacemaker, which was about as big as your fist, literally. Pacemakers get implanted here in your chest. And that was a very positive thing. It was also the year that the Medtronic mission was written. And that's an interesting story. When you think about a company having a mission, I tend to think about it as sort of a high-blown, high-flying statement of who the company is, et cetera. The story about the creation of Medtronic's mission is an interesting one, though. Medtronic was on the verge of going bankrupt in 1960 when the mission was written. And the board of directors basically told Earl Bakken that he needed to spend time writing down what the company was about and deciding what direction the company was going to go and what was important to it. And the outcome of that was the Medtronic mission. In developing the mission, Earl recognized that medical technology wasn't about nuts and bolts of wires. It was about helping patients and improving people's lives. So our mission is still exactly the way Earl wrote it. I actually have a copy of it. I carry it around on a little card that I hand out to people, and I was going to bring a bunch of them, and I forgot them at home. So a little card like this. The mission's kind of long. Talks about our goal of helping people live full lives, but it also talks about things like supporting the community, respect for employees, and making a fair profit. And there's a lot of internal contradiction and robustness around that mission. And my experience working at Medtronic has been that we turn to it and use it as kind of a rudder on a pretty regular basis in making decisions. This is just a picture of the evolution of pacemaker technology, and I thought it might be interesting for you. On the left is an external pacemaker, so that sits outside a person and connects through some wires into your heart. Then we have the pacemaker that was created in 1960 and was about this big. And over on the left, or your right, we have the current pacemaker technology, which I didn't bring it, but it's tiny, tiny. Close to the size of the microphone with the case that it's in. So Medtronic grew up as a pacemaker company. We created other heart-related electronic things, and then they took that electronic medical technology competency and used it to move into treatment for other parts of the body, basically. So now we have electrical stimulation medical devices that do things like treat Parkinson's disease. We have neurostimulators where there's a little device that provides stimulation. There's a lead or a wire that runs up into people's brains, and when it's turned on and there are pulses going for some patients, actually for quite a few patients, it controls their Parkinson's tremor. So there are great, great stories and patient videos that show people who, you know, are completely non-functional in a wheelchair, unable to feed themselves or anything, and then when their neurostimulator is turned on, it literally is like a miracle, and they can function and work and be productive in many ways. So we also acquired, over the course of the last 40, 50 years, technology in different areas. This is just kind of a map of the other things we do. This is just some data about the size and scope of the company. So Medtronic has 38,000 employees. We operate in 120 countries around the world. We have 270 locations. Most of those are sales offices. We have a headquarters in Europe. We have a headquarters in Asia. And then our world headquarters is in Minneapolis. Oops. We have 44 manufacturing facilities. We have 22 training and education Bakken research centers, and those are places where we provide training for our employees, but we also provide training to physicians who need to learn how to implant our products. That's a big part of what we do, is educating physicians and other healthcare professionals on how to use our products and therapies. This is just a picture of the chronic conditions that our different therapies treat. I don't have any Medtronic products. Earl Bakken has a bunch of them. He has a diabetes pump and a pacemaker and a neurostimulator, so he's kind of like the bionic man. And I hope I don't need any of them, but I'm glad to know that they're out there if I do. So we have 7 businesses that kind of track this. The cardiac rhythm business, which is our kind of old line core business. The neurological business, which we grew out of that cardiac rhythm business. So that's a business that Medtronic started and launched our first commercially available product in around 1998, and for a long time had no competition. And then in the last 3 or 4 years, several other companies have come into that space, and that's been an interesting story to watch develop. We have a cardiovascular business that makes stents. So stents are the little things that go, they're like little tiny springs, and they go inside people's arteries to keep them open during cardiac surgery. We have a urological and digestive disorders business, which I don't know a lot about, and not going to talk a lot about today. We have an ENT business. We have a spinal division, and then we have a diabetes business. And I think of all our different sectors, the diabetes one is the one that is the most powerful for me in some ways, because I've had a lot of people, when I tell them where I work, you know, what they say is, oh, I have a Medtronic insulin pump, and it has changed my life. So it's fun to hear those stories. This is just kind of a picture of our revenue. I think this is from FY09, so this would have been the year, our fiscal year ending April 30th, 2009, kind of a breakout of our revenues, which for the last year were about $15 billion. So that's a big company. The first year that I had interaction with Medtronic, and I'll tell this story later, was probably 1990, and that was the first year that Medtronic's revenues hit $1 billion. So it's come a long way. All right. The most important metric that we track at Medtronic is that every 5 seconds, somebody benefits from a Medtronic product or therapy. So 3 years ago, it was every 7 seconds, and now it's every 5 seconds, which is kind of an amazing thing. All right, so that's a little bit about Medtronic. I promised it wouldn't take too long. It's a really, really interesting company, great values. I feel like it's a great match for my personal values, and that's important to me. So I want to tell you my story. Kind of how did a PLS grad, so I was not a business major, not a technical person at all, who literally never set foot in the business school the 4 years that I was here, end up in a big job at a technology company. And I was thinking about that yesterday. I really did never go into the business school, which then was not nearly as nice as it is now. It's a lovely facility. So I'm going to tell you kind of my story. And the one theme, I think, for me that has shaped where I am and who I am as a person has been to be open to opportunities as they come up. You know, I know a lot of people who have a plan, a very defined plan that says, okay, I'm going to start here, then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to go here. I don't have a plan. You know, my plan has been to see how it goes, to be willing to change if change seemed appropriate, and to be open to opportunities if they came my way. And I think, you know, by the stroke of luck, I've had a lot of really fabulous opportunities that have landed me in a really good spot. So I use this photograph, or these 3 pictures, when I talked to some folks at the University of Minnesota Law School last month about kind of how I ended up where I am. Picture on the left, you guys all know where that is. The picture on the right, the 2 pictures on the right, is anybody from the Twin Cities? Okay, so the story at the University of Minnesota is they tore down their on-campus football stadium in the early 80s. That's what's pictured up on top. They sent football away, and it got played in the Metrodome, and it died in a lot of ways. And this year, they opened a new on-campus stadium, which is about 2 miles from my house. So this is a photograph of the new stadium. So just these are 2 places that shaped who I am. So I grew up in a pretty modest circumstances in a town called Moorhead, Minnesota, which is right by Fargo, North Dakota. Everybody knows Fargo because you've probably all seen the movie. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And when it was a different world then, when I was deciding where to go, there were a number of colleges in my hometown, but I knew I wanted to go away. I was an only child, and I knew I wanted to go away and kind of test my wings a little bit. I did a bunch of research, which, you know, there was no internet then. I don't even remember how I did my research, but I decided I wanted to go look at Oberlin, right? So my parents and I loaded up the car, I think it was an Oldsmobile, and we took off on a weekend trip to Ohio to look at Oberlin. My parents had friends who lived close to South Bend, and we kind of by a fluke stopped at Notre Dame on the way. I loved it. I hated Oberlin when I went to look at it. It just felt really wrong for me. So I went back home. I decided I wanted to go here. This would never happen today. Notre Dame was the only school I applied to. And I got in. I came. And I had a great experience here. I came like a lot of people do, I think, thinking I would go on to medical school or some other professional school, which I ended up doing. I fell into the program of liberal studies, liked it a lot, never had a class with this many people in it, I don't think, when I was in the program. I was a double major in music. I played the violin and the piano, and I sang in the chorale for 4 years. Met my husband, who is from South Florida. His Notre Dame story is that when he came here, the warmest coat he owned was a lined windbreaker. So he had to adapt a little bit. So I went through my 4 years at Notre Dame, really loved it, decided that I wanted to go to law school, and I applied to a number of different law schools, kind of narrowed it down to the University of Minnesota and the University of Chicago, in part because at that time, Vinny and I were planning to get married, kind of trying to decide where we were going to live, decided, yeah, Chicago or Minneapolis would both be good places. I went to the University of Chicago to tour the law school, and all my hubcaps were stolen. So it was a sign, right, that I should go back home and go to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, which turned out to be a great decision for me. It allowed me to come out, this is kind of unheard of today, but with virtually no debt, which has given me a lot of chances to make decisions that I may not have made otherwise, and for our family to make decisions that I might not have made otherwise. So I went to law school, decided that I wanted to clerk for an Eighth Circuit judge, for an appellate judge, contacted a number of judges around the country, and ended up with a one-year clerkship, which is a pretty prestigious thing, in my hometown. So I went back as an adult, as a married adult at that point, and lived for a year in my hometown, which was a really interesting experience. And when we moved back there, we kind of toyed with the idea that we might stay there in Fargo-Moorhead permanently. It's a nice city. It's about 200,000 people, kind of the big city for the Dakotas and Montana. But after living there for a year, I learned a number of things. One is, at that time, it wouldn't have been a very good place for a woman to build a practice. And then the second thing was, so when we had lived in the Twin Cities, which was about 4 hours away, my parents would come and visit us, and they'd spend the weekend, right? And they'd see us. We didn't have any kids yet. And when we lived in Fargo, I felt like we saw them all the time. We were with them a lot. But at the end of the year, it became clear that they felt like they never saw us because we never went to their house and stayed. So we ended up moving back to the Twin Cities, which we characterize as halfway between Fargo and Miami, which is where my husband's from, because it's a 4-hour drive to my family and a 4-hour flight to his family. You know, you rationalize whatever makes sense for you. This is just one of my favorite quotations that I like to use. Teddy Roosevelt, kind of a big North Dakota hero. And I think it's something that I come back to, the idea of taking opportunities when you have them and kind of figuring out what's important to you, what you have available, and making the best of it. So I'm going to leave this up a little bit while I tell you about how I landed at Medtronic. So after I clerked for the Eighth Circuit judge, I went back to the Twin Cities and worked for a big St. Paul law firm. So I had never been inside a law firm really until I started working for one, but I liked it a lot, and I wanted to be a partner, and I did all these exciting litigation things. Well, when I had been there 2 years, one of my mentors approached me and said, we have a client who's looking for a fairly new lawyer to come and spend some significant time at their business. They have some people who are going out on leave, and they just need help. They need some kind of basic help. It's not the kind of work that you've been doing, but they're great people, and you might find them interesting. Well, that was Medtronic. I went there and was basically on loan from my law firm to the company for what was supposed to be 3 months, turned into a year. In a lot of ways, could have been viewed as high risk to do that because it kind of took me away from the standard law firm track, but it felt like a good move. I trusted the person who was asking me to do it, so I went and did it. At the end of the year, they offered me a job. I said, no, I want to go back to the law firm. I want to make partner. I want to try cases. I want to do all these things. I made really good contacts at the company, and about every 18 months, they'd call and say, we have a job. Do you want to come? And I'd always say, no. So I stayed at the law firm. I made partner. I had Margaret. I had John. I had just finished trying a case on the East Coast for 3 weeks, and they called one day and said, we have a job. Do you want to come? And I kind of took a look at my life. I also, at that point, was a partner at my law firm, so I had a good sense of what that meant and what it would mean in terms of my compensation, kind of because I knew what my practice was going to be like, and I knew that while I was good at marketing, I didn't particularly like it, and I didn't like feeling like every step I took should be focused on potentially getting clients for the law firm. So I laid it all out, made some long lists, which is something that I do, had a big conversation with my husband and decided to do it. So I said yes. One of the big deciding factors for me was they were a Minnesota company. I didn't think anyone would ask me to permanently relocate. At this time, Medtronic was pretty much all in Minneapolis, and then we had some international operations. Got to Medtronic, this is as a lawyer, right, working for the general counsel, in the fall of '98. The first 3 months I was there, we made 3 significant acquisitions that changed the face of the company. We bought a big business in Seattle, Washington. We bought another business in California. We bought another business in Memphis, Tennessee. We tripled our revenues as a result of that. I had another baby. When she was 3 weeks old, I was asked if I was interested in permanently relocating to Memphis. I said no. And continued to work in the cardiac rhythm business at Medtronic, which was the core business. And I had a really interesting job there. I worked with the organization that runs all of our clinical trials, and there were a lot of interesting legal issues, a lot of interesting ethical issues, a lot of interesting kind of risk-related issues. And I moved up. I started to manage some people. And things were going fine. We had a new general counsel. And then one day, 3.5 years ago, I got a call kind of out of the blue asking whether I'd be interested in moving out of the legal department and taking a job as the position they were creating for the chief compliance officer. So this is another opportunity, right? High risk. Thought it through, did some research about what it meant to make that move, and I ended up saying yes. It was interesting, though, to think through what it meant to move out of that comfortable space that I'd built for myself inside the legal function and to move out into something that I knew a little less about. It was up a couple levels from where I'd been, so I was going to have a lot of interactions with people who I hadn't interacted with on a regular basis. It was reporting to the CEO, which was a whole other thing. It was interacting on a regular basis with the board of directors, which was something I hadn't done previously. And it was also the kind of job that you have a responsibility to the company that requires you to make independent decisions and judgments and try to work through and across the system to help the company make appropriate choices. And if you can't get that done, you need to stand up and say, this isn't a fit for me, doesn't fit with my values, I need to leave. So I was pretty confident that that wouldn't happen, but I did decide to accept the position. So I moved into that role about 3.5 years ago. And it has been an interesting ride. So I thought you might be interested a little bit in what it means to be the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer of a Fortune 100 medical device company. I went to my job description and pulled out a couple lines, right, because it's there. So, I'm responsible for providing strategic oversight and practical management and guidance to ensure the company's operations are conducted in compliance with ethical business practices, company policies, and legal and regulatory requirements. So that's kind of a mouthful. I'm responsible for a bunch of policies and procedures. I work closely with the executive management team on culture. I sort of own in my group our code of conduct, which is underneath. It's our main policy document that lives right underneath the mission. And I could have brought a slide, I didn't today, that shows our policy framework. It shows the mission on top, and then the code of conduct, and then other policies underneath that. So I've done a lot of interesting things. We had a CEO transition. It was a very planned transition that happened after I was in my role about a year. So I've been working with the new CEO, and one of the first things we did was relaunched the code of conduct, kind of to give him a tone at the top kind of opportunity to talk about his values personally and Medtronic's values and what they meant. So I do a fair amount of work on culture within the company. I mentioned before that we have 7 business sectors, and while we have a Medtronic culture, we also have a spine culture and a diabetes culture and a cardiac rhythm culture. And it's interesting sometimes to work across those different cultures to get done what we need to get done in different areas. I report to the audit committee of the board every time they meet, which is 6 times a year, and that has been really interesting. I didn't know quite what to expect, but it has been an interesting experience. I have a report, and I track and measure certain things like misconduct across the company. That's one thing that I track and trend. And whether or not we have an effective compliance culture, which is hard to measure, but I try and trend that. So I meet with the board every time they meet. Actually, I present to the full board at least once a year. I meet with the audit committee regularly, including every time they meet, I have private time with them, private session time, which is interesting. I work really closely with the general counsel. It's been interesting for me to move away from the legal function, but still be a close partner with it. Among other things, I don't know if we have any law students in the room, but I used to be in a position that by my own actions, I could attach attorney-client privilege to anything, right? Now that I'm not a lawyer for the corporation anymore, I can't do that. So I spend a fair amount of time and energy working with our lawyers to get the legal advice that I need to get my job done. In summary, it is a great job. I don't know that I'll do it forever. I like it now. There's a lot of work to be done. The issues are interesting. But I'm always kind of open to the next opportunity, whatever that might be. I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about balance. I just feel like that's something that I should talk about when I'm in a room with young people, because it's something that I think about a lot. I have a pretty busy job. I travel a fair amount. Probably twice a month I'm gone 2 to 3 days. And we have 2 careers in my family, but we've made the decision that my job wins when there's any kind of conflict. Vinny works about half time. So part of the reason I'm able to be where I am is because of a decision that we've made as a family about how we want our family to work. The other thing that is just amazing is technology and how that has enabled us to have the life that we have. Vinny is a computer person. He has his MBA in information systems, and because he's an architect, we've always had kind of cutting-edge technology in our house, and it allows us to work from home. I've taken probably 3-month leaves when each of my kids was born, but I kind of stayed in touch through technology. I had another picture, but I lost it when I was trying to finalize my presentation in the car on the way here. But I have a secret weapon, too. That's the fact that my mom lives about 1.5 miles from our house. My dad died 7 years ago, and my mom moved down to the Twin Cities about 4 years ago. I think she's very brave. So she made the decision to move because she wanted to be close to me, because I'm an only child. She wanted to be close to her grandkids, and we wanted to be able to help her more, but we weren't moving back to Fargo. But she left. She's 77 now. She was 73 at the time she moved. And she left. She had gone to coffee with a group of the same women every year, every Tuesday for 40 years. And she left that, packed up her house, and moved down to be close to us. So I don't tell everybody this, but I'll tell you guys. She'd been living in the Twin Cities about 6 months, and one day she came over and she said, I want to have more of a reason to come to your house. You guys aren't mostly parents yet, so you don't understand the value of this. But then she said, I'm going to do your laundry. So she comes and she spends a couple days every week hanging out at our house. She does the wash. She stays till the kids get home from school, has a snack with them, then goes home. It's been great to have her. I feel like we can help her. She certainly helps us and is a gift to us. So she's kind of our secret weapon. But I really do admire the fact that she was willing to take that risk and make that move. She wanted to make the move while she was still able to drive, to meet new people and make friends. So that's something that, I hope when I'm in similar circumstances down the road that I have the same courage that she did. The other thing that, makes it work for us is we have adequate resources, and we've always been able to, spend the money to have the kind of child care that we wanted and to have the flexibility that we wanted. But then the most important thing for me, I think, is that I just have kind of a deep-seated positive attitude and faith that it will all work out okay. And it always has. I mean, we have a lot of resources to help us with that, but it's a powerful thing. One thing that I would think about if I were sitting where you guys are today is, how do you feel about mobility? I mean, we have a very mobile society, and for a long time, I was pretty open to moving for my job as long as I knew that I could move back at some point and be close to my family. I don't think I'm as mobile now as I would have been, before my dad died, to be honest, because now I no longer have the flexibility because my mom has relocated to be close to us to make the decision to just pick up and move. But the other thing is, as I've kind of lived in the same place for 25 years now, I like that groundedness and that feeling of permanence and the fact that, we go to church every Sunday, and every Sunday since my kids were born, we've gone out to lunch after 10:30 Mass with a group of families, and that they have that kind of stability in their lives. So I just think it's something you really need to think seriously about. We live in a society, and there's certain kinds of jobs that, when you sign up to be very mobile, and you have to decide what that means for you and whether you're willing to sign up for it, and if you are, how long you're willing to sign up for it for. I wanted to take just a minute, and then we're going to go to questions, to talk about why I think working at a company that is somehow involved in healthcare is a really good place to land going forward, and to share some demographic information. So this is some data. It looks at Medtronic's different, maybe I'll try and use the laser pointer. Oh, it's tiny. It is tiny, Sam. Sam told me it was tiny, and I told him the only place we use laser pointers generally is to shine them out the windows of our house and see if we can get people's attention. Anyways, these are, not me, my kids do that. These are Medtronic's different sectors. AAA means aortic aneurysm. And what this shows, the dark blue line is penetration in the US, and the light blue line is international penetration. And what that means is, so when you're talking about medical devices, you talk about whether people who are indicated for them, and what that means is that according to guidelines that have been blessed by the FDA and Medicare and other international and national agencies, people deserve to have a device. It will help them. What this shows is in some of our sectors in the US, we've done a really good job of bringing our products and therapies to everybody who could benefit from them. But when you start to look internationally, and when you start to look at some of our newer therapies, we have a long way to go. There's a lot of people out there who we can still help. And Medtronic has, we call it our stand. It's a values statement, creating a world where everyone who could benefit from our products and therapies will get them. And we're a long way from being able to make that happen. This slide talks about demographics. It looks at percentage of population over 65 years of age. This really tells a story why, regardless of all the challenges that are inherent in healthcare, you know, how are we going to pay for it? What's healthcare reform going to look like? Who deserves what therapies? Medtronic's certainly a good place to be, and I think other places are too. This is just a population slide that looks at aging by population. Yeah, I'm going to go back to that one. So one statistic that I brought that I thought I'd share with you guys, a baby girl born in Japan today has a 50% chance of living to be 100. I just think that's amazing. But our population is aging. That means people need more health care. What this slide shows is chronic disease increasing with age, which shouldn't surprise anybody. But basically, when people have chronic medical conditions, they need, surprise, more health care. And medical technology companies, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, physician practices, any of those areas, I think, public policy would be great places to land. So, in summary, I think that health-related industries are going to be a good place in the future. Thanks for your attention. I wanted to leave a fair amount of time for questions, so I'm happy to be here. Enjoy your time here. This is a great place. It's like a gift, I think, to be here. And I know that you'll all go out and do great things. My Notre Dame experience was really formative for me in lots of different ways. It intellectually formative, spiritually formative, shaped my life in a lot of different ways. So you're lucky to be here. Questions?
Okay,
you can ask anything. You have to stay for a while or Sam isn't going to give you credit.
I'd like you to come forward to the microphones if you have a question so we can record them. Not everybody at once. Okay, there we go. Great.
Okay, tell me who you are and where you're from.
My name is Catherine Lucas, and I'm a sophomore from outside of Chicago. And I was just wondering, how has being a woman in the workplace contributed to your success, and do you feel that you've ever been treated differently for being a female?
I think I'm probably treated differently every day just because people treat men and women differently. I think in some ways it's allowed me to be successful. It has made my experience different. I think particularly as I've moved kind of up, a lot of the men that I work with who are around my age, so I'm 46, and particularly people who are older, the man has a big career, the wife is at home with the kids. And That's not where I am. And when we started having our family 15 years ago and Vinny started staying home, that was a huge deal. His dad kept sending him stuff. Well, maybe this job would be good for you. And finally he said, no, I'm not looking for a different job. So I think now there is a lot more equal opportunity. But I think if you are a talented woman who wants to work in business, I think there's just a ton of opportunity, because at Medtronic, in a technology company where we hire a lot of people with technical backgrounds, we're constantly trying to reach out and get women engineers, women scientists to come and work with us. I don't know if that answered your question. Anything else? Morning.
I'm Tim. I'm from Chicago. I'm a grad student. I'm doing research.
MBA?
Engineering.
Okay.
I do research in orthopedics right now, and I'm just wondering about moving in healthcare into the future and how you think current healthcare reform will affect the drive for innovation in the industries.
The drive for innovation?
Drive for innovation in the future.
That's a great question, and I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you what the outcome of healthcare reform in the U.S. is going to be. I think one thing that Medtronic focuses on a lot, and I've done a lot of thinking about, is, where will innovation come from in the future? We historically, in the device industry, and this is really different than the pharmaceutical industry, where most of the innovation comes by people sitting in labs, right? In the device industry, most of our innovation has come through physician partnerships, especially in the spine business, where a lot of the new technology is about kind of how the carpentry works that goes into spine surgery. And that innovation continues to be really, really important to us. And there's been a lot of chatter in the media and with different government enforcement agencies in the last 5 years that has looked at that physician-industry relationship that is so important to us being able to bring our products and therapies to the patients who need them, and looked at that relationship as inappropriate, partly because of some of the things that occurred in the past that suggested maybe that it wasn't always a professional relationship and it was more about sales. But we're working really hard with government and other industry groups to clarify and bring transparency to the physician-industry relationship that results in innovation in the device sector, because we feel like it's really important to be able to continue to work collaboratively with physicians to be able to invent new stuff. I don't know if that answers your question, Tim. It's an interesting time, and there's a lot of pressures from a lot of different directions. There's pressures around pricing. There's the world has gotten a lot smaller, right? And our markets have, in a lot of ways, become very intertwined, and figuring out what that means for healthcare reform is interesting. When you have things like medical tourism, where people go from the U.S. to India to have spine surgery. And the spinal area, which is in a lot of ways more elective therapy and not as much reimbursed by Medicare, is an interesting area to work in. Other questions?
With the current push on healthcare reform in this country, and everybody's being bombarded with ads to call your congressman to say you are for or against Obama's plan, has Medtronic come out and taken any position as far as the healthcare plan goes?
Medtronic is very supportive of healthcare reform in general. We actually have these healthcare reform principles that we have been operating under. We want to make sure that physicians continue to have the choice to decide what therapies to use with their patients. That being said, we are very supportive of evidence-based medicine, which means, physicians decide what patients need based on robust clinical data and evidence around whether a therapy is going to be good for their patient. I talked a little bit about the physician industry collaboration, the importance of clinical evidence, fair markets, and keeping our hospitals financially viable. It's a really, really complicated thing. We have people in Washington who, work on the lobbying side, healthcare reform. I've been pretty involved and engaged with Senator Chuck Grassley's staff, talking about transparency around that physician-industry relationship. And Medtronic came out about a year ago supporting the piece of healthcare reform legislation that's called the Physician Payment Sunshine Act, which basically says that industry will make transparent their financial relationships with doctors. We're supportive of that. We actually have voluntarily committed to start making some of those relationships financially transparent beginning in the next calendar year. So,
Kathleen, you showed a chart earlier kind of representing the penetration, I think, of medical devices, U.S. versus international.
Yep, I'll go back to that. This one?
That's the one.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, does that truly represent demand as an underserved population, or could that represent the quality of healthcare internationally being potentially better?
Oh, definitely both, but definitely the latter. We have here in the United States access to a level of healthcare that's unimaginable in most parts of the world. Even in most developed countries, a lot of countries in Europe, people don't necessarily always get what they need. It can be as simple as, they're in the second half of the year and their particular hospital has used up their pacemaker budget for the year, so they have to wait, right? So that's in some of the more developed countries in Europe. But then when you start looking at some of the third world markets, people don't have access. So it's really an issue of access to health care. And it's interesting to be part of the conversation now about countries like China, countries like India. We're watching their healthcare systems and their regulatory systems develop. And we try to be part of that conversation to help make sure that access to our products gets built into that. And then we also try to do things with technology to make sure we have options available in China, in India, to bring to that kind of developing middle class. It's a really interesting scene to watch. Did you have a question too?
I was wondering if you could
Who are you and where are you from?
I'm Taylor.
See, I knew these people.
I'm Taylor, and I'm from Indiana. And I was wondering if you could maybe give some examples of ethical dilemmas that you face in the medical technology industry and in Medtronic itself.
Examples of ethical dilemmas. Sure. So one real-life example is, and I have some video, but I don't have it with me, when to take a product off the market. So that's a good example, I think, to talk about. So medical devices are never going to be 100% perfect, right? We do everything we can to make them very high quality, to measure quality, to make sure that we build quality into our products. But every once in a while, something will happen that wasn't part of the plan, and then we have an internal conversation about what to do, right? If it's something that clearly is going to hurt people, then the decision is easy, and you make the decision to go out with a communication to a large group of physicians, to tell the FDA, potentially to take the product off the market or to stop production of it while you figure out whatever the issue is and get it fixed. But a lot of times it's not a very clear line about whether or not something is broken in a systemic kind of way. And we've had a number of situations at Medtronic where, we've looked at all the data about a particular product as it's aging and identified an issue, come together as a senior executive management team, had a conversation about what to do, and made a decision that hello, Isabella. So this is my family. Vinny, Isabella, John, Olivia, and our friend Nick. Oh. Anyways, the decision what to do. Another interesting ethical dilemma that I've been faced with in my job has been, this is going back to when I did a lot of work in the clinical trial arena and issues around patient-informed consent and who really should be providing that informed consent. How can you make a determination if the consent was real or coerced, and whether it's ever appropriate for your treating doctor to also invite you into a research study because of the relationship that you have with that treating physician. Other questions? You guys have any questions?
Hi, I'm Destin Whitehurst from Louisiana. There was a pretty popular book that came out by a former CEO of Medtronic.
Bill George?
Right, True North, and in which he talks about ethics. And I imagine that it probably raised public attention towards Medtronic in that area. How has that affected the company?
I didn't hear the last
How
part.
has that affected the company, that book?
I don't know that the Bill George book has affected the company as much as the company and his experiences there affected Bill George. Bill George was a great, great leader. And he has spent a lot of time talking and thinking about leadership since he left Medtronic. But I think in a lot of ways, his vision was shaped by his experience at the company. He still comes back and talks on occasion. But that idea of leadership and knowing kind of what your ethical compass is and knowing, what is true north for you and for your company is something that's important at Medtronic. When I first started working at Medtronic, I went to a employee meeting and heard a consultant talk about a mission and values company. And at the time, I was very new to Medtronic, and that didn't really have a lot of meaning to me. But I've come back to it over and over again. But the importance of being part of a company that has a strong mission statement, whose mission is to help people in a really important, impactful way. And then more importantly, a company that really uses its mission. So I've been in lots and lots of not lots of difficult situations, but a lot of situations at Medtronic where we have been trying to make a decision and we have come back and talked about this and, about how do you balance making a fair profit against bringing your products and therapies to everybody who needs them, right? What does it mean to come out with a low-cost product in China, for example, when we live in a world that in a lot of ways is a single market, right? So now you have a low-cost product in China because you're trying to bring your therapy to people who need it because they're on this chart, right? They're on the blue bar and they're not getting it. How do you balance that with price and the fact that in the US you have different set of technologies that you can sell for more money? It's interesting. Anything else?
Kathleen, the students here are going to be either this May or in future Mays, depending on which year they are going to be out there in the job market. And they're looking at companies that they might want to choose to interview with or actually take a job with. One of the factors for a Notre Dame student is the company's position on corporate social responsibility.
Corporate social responsibility.
Can you give some examples from Medtronic that some initiatives in that arena?
Sure. So corporate social responsibility is a hot topic these days. It's been hot in Europe for a while, and it's hot now in the U.S. I think companies really do have a responsibility to contribute to the community that they participate in, right? So Medtronic has initiatives around green, right? So we're starting to see a lot of regulation in that area too, where the European community is very concerned about what goes into our products and what kind of waste streams does that create, and what happens to those waste streams, and what's your carbon footprint, those kinds of things. So we are measuring all those kinds of things. We built a new building. It has all of the LEED type stuff in it. The other area is contributing to the community. So Medtronic really has a strong volunteer program where it connects its professionals, so scientists, engineers, business people, with different schools and nonprofits in whatever community the people are working in. So we have initiatives kind of across the globe. And then we also have a charitable foundation that I think in the last calendar year contributed like $58 million, something like that. So I think the idea of corporate social responsibility is real. And I think corporations do have a responsibility to their communities. We do a lot around education at Medtronic because it's really important for us to be able to get the talent that we need on the technical side going forward. So I'm glad to hear about your engineering project. Anything else? Last chance.
We have time for one more question. George?
Coming back to China, how did you solve that problem with the price for the same product to give a lower price in China compared to here, the USA?
So I don't know that we have solved that problem yet, but we see it. We're in the midst of it. It's interesting. We actually, in the mid-90s, took a run at the China market and tried to bring out a low-cost pacemaker, because in the mid-90s, this light blue bar in China was probably only at about 20%. So there were a ton of people who were not getting pacemaker therapy. And there's kind of a hierarchy amongst our therapies and products. Some of them are life-supporting, and some of them are life-enhancing. And pacemakers fall into that life-supporting side. If you don't have the support for your heart rate, you're going to die. I remember my grandfather got a pacemaker in the 70s, and at that time, pacing technology was a little bit unsophisticated, and it went 70. So his was set to go 70 beats a minute, regardless of what he was doing, it went 70, right? And then somebody at Medtronic invented an activity sensor. So his next pacemaker had what we call rate support in it. So if he went up the steps, his heart would beat faster, right? That was a little bit of an aside, but we took a run at the Chinese market in the mid-90s and did come out with a lower cost, kind of basic, no bells and whistles pacemaker that was manufactured in China. And it was, and again, my opinion, not Medtronic speaking here, but not a very big success. It was a failure. And it was a failure in part because of where the Chinese economy was at that point. Now there's a really developing middle class in China, and I think there may be more of an appetite for that. But at that time, in the mid-90s in China, the people who really would have access to the ability to pay for pacemaker technology all wanted whatever was getting used in the U.S. They didn't want a basic pacemaker, and it wasn't very successful. So now we have kind of a different strategy around China. Anything else? Are we done?
Kathy, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
I'd like to make one last comment. Kathy and her family, for the first time in 25 years, are going to be back, and they're going to attend the game tomorrow. So go
Irish.
Those of you that are going to lunch, if you'd come down here, please. We have six or seven.